Hello, my name is John Major Jenkins, and I've decided to create a series of YouTube video clips on my work. It is late March of 2012, and it's high time that I did this. Up to this point, I've only personally posted one video to YouTube over all these years. Of course, you can go to YouTube and Google my name and find hundreds of video clips, excerpts from documentaries I've been in, interviews I've done at conferences with a wide variety of people over the years that have made their way to YouTube. And I think it's high time that I shared directly my own thoughts on my work over the last 25 years, my work with Maya cosmology, the Maya people, the 2012 enigma. And so I've sort of conceived of this as sort of a grassroots, sort of inexpensive way to share my work here in my home in Colorado. So the question that often opens this is, what got me interested in the Maya people? And that goes back some 25 years. I was living in Colorado, and I went to visit the Mesa Verde cliff dwellings, and I became more and more interested in the Native American people and was reading books. Masked Gods by Frank Waters was an early one that I read, and became intrigued with the Maya people and the possibility of traveling down there to Mexico and Central America myself. So I began saving up some money. I worked a job in a night shift a factory, and I saved up about $1,000, and I planned my first trip south of the border. And at age 22 in 1986, I went. I had planned it out. I wanted to visit a lot of the archaeological sites, and I wanted to visit the traditional villages in the highlands of Guatemala that I had read about, where I had read that the traditional 260-day calendar is still being followed. And in early December of late 1986, I got to Mexico City, and that first trip lasted about 3.5 months. It was filled with misadventures and experiences with the Maya people and in Central America that really basically changed my life. And I returned time and time again over the years, often doing volunteer relief work and learning more and more about the modern Maya culture, and in my studies learning more about the ancient Maya people. So that was really the first thing that got me going on being fascinated with the Maya culture and wanting to learn more and more about it. So my journey is unusual in the sense that I'm self-taught largely with the Maya material. And my own journey of discovery with the Maya world has paralleled some major breakthroughs in understanding the ancient Maya. For example, the decipherment of the hieroglyphic writing really, got underway, really got turbocharged in the 1980s, and many breakthroughs were happening. And I started writing articles, and I was able to get some of my articles published in the late 1980s. Actually, 1990 is when I published a series of articles in my brother's newspaper in Chicago, which was an arts and music newspaper called Scene Zine. And by that time, I had already finished my first book, which I self-published in 1989. It was called Journey to the Mayan Underworld. That was about that first trip that I took to Central America. And I was already moving on to some other research. In 1990, I also went to Guatemala to do a student research or a student volunteer project in San Pedro, Guatemala, on Lake Atitlan. That was a summer-long project where I helped rebuild a school. And after that sojourn in Guatemala in the summer of 1990, I went directly overland to Nicaragua because I sort of fancied myself to be a roving journalist reporter in the field, and I wanted to see what was going on in Nicaragua because it was right after the 1990 election that ousted Daniel Ortega, and the Sandinistas had been voted in democratically in 1980, but then there was the moratorium on the, leveled against the Nicaraguan people during the 1990s, and finally it is said that they voted with their stomachs and they voted out the Sandinistas because the people had been suffering under these international sanctions that were inspired by Ronald Reagan and the United States policies and misunderstanding of what the Sandinistas were about, and so on and so on and so on. But the early phase of my interest unavoidably focused on the incredible atrocities against the Maya people in Guatemala that I was really only vaguely aware of on that first trip that I took. I mean, I was 22 years old, and I was more interested in seeing the temple sites and the archaeology and going around and looking at the buildings and going to the villages and hanging out with the Maya people and so on. But obviously that first trip woke me up to the genocidal things that were going on in Guatemala in the 1980s. In fact, I have one memory from that first trip when I visited Tikal in the northern Petén region of Guatemala, and I had to get to Belize, and so I waited at the crossroads for the bus, and it came, and it was jam-packed full of people. So I had to get on the roof of the bus with many other campesinos and people, and that road between Tikal and the Belizean border just was chock full of military outposts. I mean, we were stopped like 4 times during this 3-hour bus ride, and everybody had to get out and off of the bus and show the passports or IDs or whatever. And at the last checkpoint, it was kind of a scary and ugly scene because three guys that were on the bus got hauled away by these military guys with guns, and who knows what happened to them, but that was sort of my brush with the militarization of Guatemala in the mid-1980s. And so my first pieces that I wrote were journalistic pieces that were pointing at the injustices going on in Central America. When I went, after that student volunteer project in Guatemala, when I went to Nicaragua, I was able to meet with an elderly man who in Esteli, and I stayed with him and his family for several days in Esteli, and he told me stories about the insurrection in 1977, and even at that time, 1990, you could still see bullet holes and the evidence of the revolution that led to the Sandinistas taking power for a decade in Nicaragua. And actually, I wrote about that. That was a 2-part article that I wrote that appeared in the pages of Scene Zine, the Chicago newspaper, that my brother was publishing at the time. And so that's, kind of how I had my entree into publishing, and I liked to write, I liked to research. That first book that I wrote, Journey to the Mayan Underworld, was really kind of a travel log. That I was sort of inspired by that genre of writing, reading Paul Thoreau and other travel writers like that. But obviously you need to do a little research, and I was interested in the Maya calendar and the Maya people and the ancient Maya knowledge. And so the research that I was doing at that time was, peppered into that book, and my curiosity got more and more opened up to you know, these mysteries in the Maya